August 19, 1944, Wehrmacht Headquarters, East Prussia. General Oberst Alfred Jodl reviewed the latest intelligence reports from the collapsing Western Front. His staff had calculated the mathematics of Allied supply lines stretching over 400 miles from the Normandy beaches to Patton's spearheading Third Army. The Americans have outrun their logistics. Patton will halt within days, perhaps hours. No army can sustain such advanced speeds without fuel. From his position at Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters, Jodl analyzed what every German general understood from experience. An armored division consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel daily when advancing. The Americans were now 400 miles from their supply depots. The calculation was inescapable. Patton's Third Army would grind to a halt, giving the Wehrmacht time to regroup at the Siegfried Line, perhaps hold until winter. What Jodl didn't know was that 125 miles away, 5,988 trucks were already rolling eastward in an endless convoy, headlights blazing in defiance of military doctrine, carrying 12,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours. The Red Ball Express, a logistics operation so audacious that German military science had never conceived it possible, was about to shatter every assumption about mechanized warfare. Within 72 hours, Patton's supposedly immobilized tanks would crash through German positions at the Seine. Within a week, they would liberate Paris. Within a month, they would stand at the German border. The Wehrmacht's finest military minds were about to receive a lesson in American logistics that would redefine their understanding of modern warfare, delivered by 23,000 truck drivers, 75% of them African American, who turned a one-way highway system into the most efficient military supply line in history. The German miscalculation. The German General Staff's confidence in American logistical failure stemmed from decades of military experience and recent observations. The Wehrmacht had pioneered blitzkrieg, revolutionized combined arms warfare, and understood intimately the tyranny of supply lines. Their own campaigns had repeatedly stalled when logistics failed to keep pace with tactical success. In Russia, the Wehrmacht's advance had foundered not from Soviet resistance initially, but from the simple inability to supply forces across vast distances. German trucks broke down on Russian roads. Horse-drawn wagons, still 80% of German military transport, couldn't match the speed of panzer spearheads. Railway gauge differences meant supplies piled up hundreds of miles from the front. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich von Luttwitz, who would command 47 Panzer Corps from September 1944, had written in July, "The Americans face the same logistical impossibility we faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage becomes a disadvantage. Machines require fuel, ammunition, parts. They have advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History teaches us what comes next: paralysis." German intelligence meticulously tracked American consumption rates. A single Sherman tank burned 0.5 miles per gallon on roads, far worse cross-country. An infantry division required 700 tons of supplies daily. An armored division needed 1,000 tons. Patton commanded 12 divisions advancing on a 60-mile front. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. 12,000 tons daily transported 400 miles from the beaches over damaged roads through a transportation network the Germans had systematically destroyed during their retreat. General Major Siegfried Westphal, who would become Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt in September, calculated on August 20th. Even if the Americans possessed unlimited trucks, which they don't, and perfect roads, which they don't, and no mechanical failures, which is impossible, they still couldn't sustain Patton's advance more than another 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industry. Birth of the impossible. At 2 p.m. on August 25, 1944, in a requisitioned French chateau near Saint-Lô, Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres of the Motor Transport Service faced a room full of skeptical officers. The math they presented was stark. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any army in history, advancing at speeds that defied all logistical planning. Traditional supply methods, railway transport, scheduled convoys, depot-to-depot distribution, had collapsed under the strain. "Gentlemen," Ayres announced, "we're going to create a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front lines. Every vehicle will run 20 hours out of 24, no stopping except for gas and emergencies. We'll move 12,500 tons daily, minimum." The name came from railway terminology. A red ball freight was an express shipment that took priority over everything else. The Red Ball Express would operate on the same principle: absolute priority, no delays, no exceptions. The technical specifications defied German military doctrine. 2 parallel one-way highways, one for loaded trucks going forward, one for empties returning. 24-hour operations with headlights blazing, abandoning blackout discipline. No stop policy, except for fuel and mechanical failure. 5-minute convoy intervals maintaining 35 miles per hour average speed. Mobile maintenance units every 50 miles. MP checkpoints removing any vehicle below 25 miles per hour. Colonel Charles Thrasher, commanding the advanced section of COMZ, Communication Zone, reviewed the projected numbers. "We need 140 truck companies, 5,958 vehicles, minimum, operating at 90% availability. That's impossible by any logistics textbook ever written." Yet within 36 hours, the impossible was operational. The operation begins. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks, nicknamed the Deuce and a Half, loaded with 105mm artillery shells bound for Patton's guns at Melun, 300 miles east. The demographic composition of the Red Ball Express would have stunned German racial theorists. Of the 23,000 drivers who would eventually operate the route, approximately 75% were African American soldiers serving in a still segregated army. These men, who couldn't eat in white restaurants or use white facilities in much of America, were keeping the most celebrated white general's army in motion. The drivers developed their own culture within hours. They painted slogans on their trucks: "Patton's Blood Bank," "Hitler, Here We Come," "Detroit to Berlin Express." They created their own traffic rules. Slow vehicles pulled off immediately. Mechanical failures were pushed into ditches. Any truck below 20 miles per hour was considered a roadblock. By August 28th, German reconnaissance units began reporting something unprecedented. Units from Aufklärungsabteilung 116 radioed from positions overlooking the main Red Ball route. Continuous vehicle column, Headlights visible for 20 kilometers. No spacing, no blackout discipline. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. Americans have abandoned all military precaution. This violated everything German military doctrine taught. Headlights at night invited air attack. Continuous columns presented perfect artillery targets. No spacing between vehicles meant a single disabled truck could halt an entire convoy. Yet the Americans seemed unconcerned. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 21st Panzer Division, personally observed the Red Ball Express from concealed positions on August 30th. His report to Army Group Headquarters reflected growing alarm. The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension. Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals day and night without pause. They don't hide, don't disperse, don't follow any rules we understand. It's not military science. It's mass production applied to warfare. The numbers that defied logic, the numbers achieved by the Red Ball Express, defied German calculations of what was logistically possible. First week, August 25th, 31st, 1944. 89,939 tons of supplies delivered. Daily average, 12,148 tons. Round-trip distance, 686 miles. Vehicle utilization, 5,958 trucks, making 1.5 trips daily. Fuel consumed by the operation itself, 300,000 gallons daily. German logistics specialists captured these numbers from American documents and dismissed them as propaganda. But the numbers were real, and they were accelerating. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had established a rhythm that seemed impossible to German logistics officers, who still relied on horse-drawn wagons for 80% of their transport. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminus. Average convoy, 67 vehicles. Load per vehicle, 5 tons standard, 7 tons frequent overload. Time to cover 350 miles one way, 14 hours. Average turnaround time at each end, 2 hours. Vehicles in constant motion, 5,000 at any given moment. Innovation under pressure. The Red Ball Express generated innovations hourly as drivers and mechanics solved problems German military science considered insurmountable. When trucks broke down, approximately 1,800 daily, mobile maintenance units performed repairs on the roadside. Mechanics developed a triage system, 15 minutes to fix or push it off the road. Parts were cannibalized from vehicles deemed unrepairable. Engines were swapped in 45 minutes using mobile cranes. When the designated Red Ball route became congested, drivers created alternate paths. They commandeered French buses to move personnel and free up trucks for cargo. They borrowed German vehicles, painting them olive drab and pressing them into service. They built bypasses around destroyed bridges, using rubble from bombed buildings as roadbed. The Germans, observing this chaos that somehow produced order, couldn't comprehend it. German logistics doctrine emphasized careful planning, maintenance schedules, proper procedures. The Americans violated every principle, yet their system accelerated rather than collapsed. The African-American contribution. The predominance of African-American drivers in the Red Ball Express created cognitive dissonance for German racial theorists. Nazi ideology declared blacks inferior, incapable of technical tasks, lacking initiative. Yet these drivers were performing logistics miracles that German forces couldn't match. The African-American soldiers understood the irony. They knew what the Nazis thought of them, which made them drive even harder. Every mile they drove proved Hitler wrong. They were fighting racism with truck keys, defeating Nazi ideology through superior performance. Some German prisoners forced to load Red Ball trucks as laborers found their worldview shattered by working alongside African American sergeants who calculated weight distributions faster than German engineers, who spoke better English than German English instructors, who treated prisoners fairly despite everything Nazi propaganda had told them about racial behavior. Infrastructure on the fly, the Red Ball Express, required infrastructure Germans deemed impossible to create under combat conditions. Engineers built or reinforced 40 bridges, created 15 major fuel depots, established 26 maintenance stations, constructed 8 temporary cities for drivers, all while the operation was running. The bridge at Mantes had been destroyed by German engineers specifically to halt American logistics. The Wehrmacht calculated replacement would require 6 weeks minimum. American engineers built a temporary bridge in 14 hours, while Red Ball convoys detoured only 8 miles on hastily bulldozed bypass roads. German engineers observed American construction methods with amazement. No planning meetings, no detailed blueprints, just immediate action. They built faster than Germans could destroy, created infrastructure that appeared overnight in French fields. The ammunition Miracle One Red Ball Express achievement particularly stunned German artillery officers, ammunition supply rates that exceeded their highest theoretical calculations. American artillery units fired without restriction, a luxury no German unit had enjoyed since 1942. During the reduction of Metz fortifications in September 1944, 3 Corps artillery fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every round plus 20% surplus. German artillery defending Metz was rationed to 50 rounds per gun per day. The disparity was overwhelming. American guns fired continuously for hours, while German artillery remained silent. German officers calculated that such bombardments required 50 truckloads of ammunition per hour. The Red Ball provided it without pause. Vehicle attrition and American solutions. The Red Ball Express consumed vehicles at rates that would have paralyzed any other military. By late September, mechanical attrition reached staggering proportions. Average vehicle life, 10,000 miles, normal, 30,000. Daily deadline rate, 30% of all vehicles. Engines replaced, 500 weekly. Tires consumed, 10,000 weekly. Total vehicles destroyed or abandoned, 5,000 plus, yet the operation never slowed. American production had anticipated such losses. Ships arrived weekly at French ports, carrying hundreds of new trucks. Replacement drivers were trained in 2 days and thrown into convoys. German calculations showed Americans destroying more trucks weekly than the Wehrmacht possessed in France. Yet their transport capacity increased rather than decreased. They had achieved something Germans thought impossible: logistics faster than consumption. The psychological impact. French civilians along the Red Ball route witnessed American abundance that contradicted years of German occupation's scarcity. The psychological impact on occupied populations was immediate and profound. Red Ball Express drivers, particularly African Americans, often shared their rations with French civilians despite regulations. At every stop, children would gather, and drivers would give them chocolate, cigarettes, soap. The contrast with German occupation was stark. Americans gave away casually what Germans had rationed strictly. German intelligence reported the propaganda impact. French civilians now believe American victory inevitable. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased 400% along Red Ball routes. The population that accepted our occupation now actively opposes it. German attempts to comprehend. By October 1944, German commanders, now fighting on their own borders, reflected on what they had witnessed. Field Marshal Model wrote in his final report, "We were not defeated by American tanks or planes primarily. We were defeated by American trucks. The Red Ball Express proved that in modern war logistics is strategy." Desperately, German forces attempted to create their own version of the Red Ball Express in late 1944. Operation Grief, during the Battle of the Bulge, included plans for captured American trucks to create German supply lines. The effort failed immediately. German drivers couldn't maintain American speeds. German mechanics couldn't repair American equipment fast enough. German fuel supplies couldn't sustain the consumption rates. Most fundamentally, Germans could not replicate the American attitude of unlimited resources. Oberst Otto Skorzeny, commanding the operation, reported, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were deadlined. Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." The final statistics. The final statistics of the Red Ball Express stand as testament to American industrial warfare. 82 days of operation, 412, 193 tons of supplies delivered, 122 million ton miles, trucks employed, 5,958 daily average, 7,000 peak, drivers involved, 23,000 total, fuel consumed, 57 million gallons, tires worn out, 180,000, vehicles destroyed, 5,000 plus, cost, 100 million, German divisions defeated through supply advantage, 47, estimated war days shortened, 180. These numbers tell a story that transcended military operations. They represent the moment when warfare changed forever, when industrial capacity became more important than tactical brilliance, when logistics determined strategy rather than serving it. The assessment. Reviewing these figures in captivity, German officers admitted they had calculated American logistics based on European precedent. They had multiplied their best performance by 3 and assumed that was American maximum. They were wrong by a factor of 10. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, wrote in 1950, "The Red Ball Express proved logistics determined strategy, not vice versa. Americans understood this. We learned it too late." The most insightful analysis came from General Oberst Heinz Guderian, father of German armored warfare. "We invented blitzkrieg, but never solved its fundamental limitation, logistics. Americans solved it through industrial excess we deemed impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a flowing river of material that drowned our forces. Legacy and impact. The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944, but its impact echoed through military history. It proved that in the industrial age, victory belongs not to the bravest soldiers or brightest generals, but to the nation that can deliver the most supplies the fastest, the farthest. An unexpected consequence of the Red Ball Express was its revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers returned to America with experience operating the world's largest transportation network. These veterans founded trucking companies, designed interstate highways, created the modern American logistics industry. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were started by Red Ball veterans who applied military logistics to civilian commerce. The operation's success came not from military genius, but from American characteristics. Germans never understood industrial excess, mechanical aptitude, improvisational skill, and most importantly, the initiative of individual soldiers who made independent decisions that in the Wehrmacht would require field marshal approval. The final verdict. In his memoirs, General George Patton, whose Third Army was the primary beneficiary of the Red Ball Express, wrote the ultimate tribute. The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserve as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. Without them, the Third Army doesn't move. Without movement, we don't win. They were black soldiers mostly, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition. But they won the war as surely as any rifleman. History must record this truth. That truth stands as the final testament to the Red Ball Express. 23,000 mostly African American drivers operating 6,000 trucks on a one-way highway to victory achieved what German military science declared impossible. They supplied advancing armies faster than physics should allow, maintained tempo beyond human endurance, and proved that in modern warfare, the side with the most trucks beats the side with the best tactics. The German generals had laughed at American logistics, dismissing it as wasteful, undisciplined, impossible to sustain. 82 days later, those same generals surrendered to armies supplied by the Red Ball Express, finally understanding that American trucks had defeated German tanks, that industrial abundance had overwhelmed military excellence, that logistics had become strategy. Individual heroes of the highway. Among the 23,000 Red Ball drivers, individual stories of heroism emerged that Germans found incomprehensible within their military framework. These were verified accounts from military records. Corporal John L. Houston drove continuously for 48 hours, delivering ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division at Cambrai, falling asleep at the wheel 3 times but continuing after being revived by other drivers. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire from overheated brakes while carrying medical supplies. Instead of abandoning it as procedure required, he drove the burning vehicle 2 miles to a field hospital, jumping out as flames reached the cab. The supplies saved wounded soldiers from both armies. Technical Sergeant William Johnson, after driving for 36 straight hours, discovered his convoy had taken a wrong turn into German-held territory. Rather than turn back, he led 14 trucks through enemy lines in darkness, delivering critically needed plasma to a surrounded battalion. These stories, multiplied thousands of times, revealed American military culture to observing Germans: individual initiative, calculated risk-taking, mission accomplishment over regulatory compliance. Winter operations, the ultimate test. The winter of 1944-45 provided the Red Ball Express's ultimate test. Freezing rain, snow, and ice should have stopped wheeled transport. German doctrine stated wheeled logistics became impossible below minus 10 degrees Celsius. Yet the Red Ball Express continued. Drivers wrapped chains on tires, poured alcohol in radiators, kept rolling. Speeds dropped from 35 to 15 miles per hour, but tonnage delivery continued. German observers reported ice-covered convoys moving through blizzards that had stopped panzer divisions. The Americans had created a logistics system that functioned regardless of weather, terrain, or enemy action. It wasn't elegant or efficient by German standards, but it was unstoppable. The view from the other side. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were required to study Red Ball Express operations for historical records. Their conclusions were unanimous and devastating to German military pride. General der Infanterie Friedrich Schulz summarized, "The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined. Americans created a temporary civilization. Thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies that existed only to feed armies, then dissolved when no longer needed. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They created superior temporary systems in days." Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Supreme German Commander in the West, received comprehensive intelligence on the Red Ball Express on September 15, 1944. After studying the reports for hours, he summoned his staff. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we face something beyond military solution. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed the culminating point where advancing forces outrun supplies. That point doesn't exist. They have revolutionized warfare, and we are fighting the last war." His operations officer, Oberst Hans Speidel, suggested interdicting the Red Ball routes with the remaining Luftwaffe. Von Rundstedt's response revealed complete understanding. "With what shall we interdict? They have 6,000 trucks. If we destroy 1,000, which we cannot, they'll replace them in a week. We'd need to destroy 200 trucks daily just to match their production. We don't have 200 aircraft total." The sound of victory. The Red Ball Express became unintentional propaganda more powerful than any planned operation. German soldiers could hear the convoys at night, endless streams of motors that never stopped. The sound itself became psychological warfare. German units reported hearing ghost convoys that demoralized troops as effectively as actual logistics. The knowledge that Americans had unlimited supplies while Germans rationed their last ammunition created despair that undermined combat effectiveness. American psychological warfare units recognized the impact. They began broadcasting truck engine sounds toward German lines when actual convoys weren't present. German units reported these phantom convoys as real, demonstrating the psychological damage the Red Ball Express had inflicted. Transformation of military thinking. Military historians universally recognize the Red Ball Express as the decisive logistics operation of the European theater. Without it, Patton's advance stops. Paris falls weeks later. German forces successfully establish winter defensive lines. The operation validated American military doctrine that emphasized logistics over tactics. While German officers studied Clausewitz and battlefield maneuver, Americans studied Detroit assembly lines and railroad timetables. The Red Ball Express demonstrated that in modern warfare, the ability to supply forces determines victory more than tactical brilliance. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel stated at his interrogation, "When we understood your logistics capacity, we knew the war was lost. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon against which we had no defense." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, among Germany's most competent commanders, was asked what most surprised him about American forces. His answer, "Not your tanks, not your planes, but your trucks. The Red Ball Express showed us that you had militarized your entire society's production capacity. We were fighting your factories, not just your soldiers." The racial reckoning. The Red Ball Express forced an unexpected racial reckoning within the American military itself. The operation's success depended overwhelmingly on African American soldiers who were still segregated, denied equal treatment, barred from combat roles. General Eisenhower, visiting Red Ball operations in September 1944, witnessed the contradiction firsthand. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded, "The general stood watching colored drivers who'd been at it for 20 hours straight. He said, 'These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to reconsider many things.'" The success created pressure for integration that contributed to military desegregation 3 years later. African American soldiers had proven in France what they always knew. Given the tools and opportunity, they would match anyone. The Red Ball was their combat, and they won it decisively. German racial theorists struggled to explain the contradiction. SS racial science publications simply stopped mentioning American logistics operations. The evidence was too overwhelming to deny, too damaging to acknowledge. The Civilian Revolution, an unexpected consequence of the Red Ball Express, was its revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers returned to America with experience operating the world's largest transportation network. Malcolm McLean, who revolutionized shipping with containerization, credited conversations with Red Ball veterans for his insights. Fred Smith, founder of FedEx, studied Red Ball Express operations at Yale. The interstate highway system, designed in the 1950s, incorporated lessons learned on French roads in 1944. These veterans had learned in France that volume beats efficiency, speed beats perfection, and if you can keep trucks rolling 24 hours, you can move the world. The 50th anniversary. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express. At the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C., the ceremony recognized the operation that had been overshadowed by combat operations, but proved equally decisive in Allied victory. Veterans who attended spoke of their pride in an operation that proved American industrial might and individual determination could overcome any obstacle. They had driven through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. They were black soldiers mostly, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition during the war. But they had delivered victory at 35 miles per hour. One veteran, former Corporal Jesse Brown, age 72, stood before the crowd. They told us we were just truck drivers, not real soldiers, but when Patton needed shells, we brought them. When the infantry needed food, we delivered. We drove until we couldn't see straight, then drove some more. We were black men proving ourselves in a white man's army, showing Hitler and everyone else what Americans could do when it mattered. The ultimate lesson. The Red Ball Express proved that in modern warfare, logistics is not support. It is the main effort. The operation demonstrated that industrial democracy could mobilize resources on a scale totalitarian efficiency couldn't match. German generals who had laughed at American logistics were silenced by 6,000 trucks delivering 12,500 tons daily across 700 miles of liberated France. They had assumed Americans would follow European precedent, conserve resources, advance cautiously. Instead, Americans created a logistics tsunami that drowned German forces in Allied abundance. The highways of France still bear the scars of the Red Ball Express, ruts worn by overloaded trucks, bridges hastily repaired, roadsides littered with abandoned vehicles. But the greatest monument to the operation is the speed of Allied victory. Every day the war shortened, saved thousands of lives. The Red Ball Express shortened it by months. The final word. The last word belongs to a German officer whose name is lost to history, quoted by a Red Ball driver at the 1994 commemoration. Standing beside a road in Belgium, watching the endless convoy of American trucks, the officer said in accented English to his captors, "We prepared for everything, your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer rolled past him at 5-minute intervals, driven by exhausted Americans who were rewriting the rules of warfare one delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express had made logistics into strategy, supply into victory, and trucks into the most decisive weapon of the European war. In the end, the German generals who laughed at American logistics learned the hardest lesson of modern warfare. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics, and Americans talk trucks. The Red Ball Express was America talking very loudly indeed, in the roar of 6,000 engines that never stopped, carrying democracy and destruction at 35 miles per hour down a one-way road to victory. The German generals stopped laughing when they understood this truth. But by then, Patton was already at their gates, supplied by the greatest logistics operation in military history. The Wehrmacht had been defeated not by superior tactics or braver soldiers, but by 23,000 truck drivers who refused to stop rolling. The Red Ball Express stands as perhaps the purest expression of American military philosophy. When faced with an impossible problem, throw overwhelming resources at it until it ceases to be impossible. Where German military science sought elegant solutions through careful planning, Americans achieved crude success through sheer abundance. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't efficient, but it was devastatingly effective. In August 1944, German generals had calculated with mathematical precision that American logistics would fail. By November 1944, those same generals were surrendering to armies that the Red Ball Express had kept rolling. They had learned too late that in the industrial age, the nation with the most trucks wins the war. The Red Ball Express had proven that truth at 35 miles per hour, 24 hours a day, for 82 days. That changed the course of World War II. German military science never recovered from the lesson. Epilogue: The Echo Through Time. The Red Ball Express didn't just win a war, it revolutionized how wars would be fought. Its lessons echo through every modern military operation, from Korea to Vietnam to Desert Storm to Afghanistan. The principle it established, that overwhelming logistics can defeat superior tactics, became the foundation of American military doctrine. In Korea, when Chinese forces cut off UN troops at the Chosin Reservoir, it was Red Ball veterans who organized the aerial resupply that saved the surrounded divisions. In Vietnam, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was essentially a communist attempt to create their own Red Ball Express. In Desert Storm, the famous left hook through the Iraqi desert was only possible because American logistics had evolved from the Red Ball model, creating massive fuel and supply dumps in trackless desert, supporting the fastest armored advance in military history, the corporate revolution. But perhaps the Red Ball Express's greatest impact was on civilian life. The veterans who returned to America didn't just bring military experience, they brought a revolution in thinking about logistics, efficiency, and supply chain management. Fred Smith, founder of FedEx, studied Red Ball Express operations when creating his overnight delivery system. The principle was identical: absolute priority, continuous movement, accept waste to achieve speed. Walmart's revolutionary cross-docking system, where goods move from incoming to outgoing trucks without warehousing, was pioneered by Red Ball veterans who had learned that storage was delay, and delay was defeat. The American interstate highway system itself was partly inspired by Red Ball Express operations. President Eisenhower, who had seen the Red Ball's dedicated routes enable victory, pushed for similar dedicated highways across America. The result was the largest public works project in human history, and it was designed by engineers who had learned on the roads of France that dedicated routes mean uninterrupted flow. The human cost remembered. In 2020, the last known Red Ball Express driver, Corporal James E. Williams of the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company, died at age 97 in Detroit. His obituary in the New York Times noted that he had driven for 46 straight hours during the September push, delivered ammunition under German artillery fire, and been awarded the Bronze Star for repairing his truck under combat conditions and completing his delivery. But Williams, like most Red Ball veterans, rarely spoke of his service until late in life. "We were just truck drivers," he said in a 2018 interview. "The real heroes were the combat soldiers. We just kept them supplied." This modesty obscured the revolutionary nature of what they had accomplished. They hadn't just kept soldiers supplied, they had redefined what supply meant in modern warfare, the German reassessment. In the decades after the war, German military historians conducted extensive studies of the Red Ball Express, trying to understand how their general staff, arguably the most professional military leadership in the world, had so completely misunderstood American capabilities. The conclusion, published in the official German military history in 1962, was stark. We calculated American logistics by European standards. We assumed they would husband resources, maintain equipment, follow military procedure. We didn't understand that American culture itself, its industrial base, its improvisational spirit, its acceptance of waste in pursuit of abundance, was their secret weapon. The Red Ball Express was not a military operation. It was American society at war. General Hasso von Manteuffel, writing in 1970, put it more bluntly. We thought Americans were soft because they relied on machines. We discovered they were strong because they could produce unlimited machines. We thought their diversity was weakness. We discovered it was strength. Black soldiers, white soldiers, immigrants, farm boys, city kids, all working together in ways our racial ideology said was impossible. The Red Ball Express didn't just defeat our armies, it defeated our worldview. The modern echo. Today, military logistics officers at the Army Transportation School at Fort Lee, Virginia, still study the Red Ball Express as the foundational example of American logistics doctrine. The lessons remain relevant. Volume overcomes friction. Speed is more important than efficiency. Mechanical redundancy eliminates single points of failure. Individual initiative multiplies capability. Waste is acceptable if it achieves the mission. These principles, revolutionary in 1944, are now standard in both military and civilian logistics. Amazon's willingness to waste packaging to achieve next-day delivery, the military's aerial resupply of remote Afghan outposts, regardless of cost, the global supply chains that assume 20% loss to achieve just-in-time delivery, all trace their intellectual lineage to those trucks rolling through France in 1944. The racial recognition. It took decades for the African American contribution to the Red Ball Express to receive proper recognition. The segregated Army of 1944 deliberately minimized publicity about black soldiers' crucial role. Official histories mentioned the operation, but not its racial composition. Hollywood films about World War II ignored it entirely. This began to change in the 1970s. The civil rights movement had sensitized America to overlooked contributions. Military integration in Korea had proved what Red Ball drivers had demonstrated, that competence has no color. Historians began interviewing surviving drivers, uncovering a story of American victory achieved primarily by soldiers who couldn't vote in several states they were defending. In 1997, the Army Transportation Museum created a permanent Red Ball Express exhibit. For the first time, the racial composition of the operation was prominently displayed. Visiting German military officers there for a NATO conference stood in silence before photographs of African American drivers loading trucks. One colonel was overheard saying to his companion, "So, Hitler was defeated by the people he said were inferior. There is justice in history." The last mile. By 2000, historians had access to both American and German archives, allowing the first complete picture of the Red Ball Express's impact. The numbers, even decades later, remained staggering. But more important than the tonnage delivered or miles driven was the conceptual revolution it represented. The German military tradition, dating back to Frederick the Great, emphasized professional excellence, detailed planning, and resource conservation. The American approach, exemplified by the Red Ball Express, emphasized industrial abundance, improvisational capability, and resource expenditure. It wasn't better soldiering, it was better systems. A German staff study from 1960, examining why the Wehrmacht lost, concluded, "We were the better soldiers man for man. Our officers were more professionally educated, our doctrine more sophisticated, our tactics more refined. But the Americans were the better industrialists. The Red Ball Express was not a military operation as we understood it. It was an industrial process in uniform. We were playing chess. They were playing a different game entirely, one where you could create new pieces faster than your opponent could capture them." The permanent lesson. Today, as military theorists debate future warfare, cyber operations, Space Force, artificial intelligence, the Red Ball Express remains relevant. Its fundamental lesson transcends technology. In modern conflict, the side that can sustain operations wins. Whether moving physical supplies or digital data, whether supporting tanks or satellites, the principle remains unchanged. Logistics is strategy. Modern American military doctrine, refined through Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, and the global war on terror, still reflects Red Ball principles. The massive logistics bases in Kuwait that supported Iraq operations, the aerial resupply that sustained remote Afghan outposts, the Navy's underway replenishment that keeps carrier battle groups at sea indefinitely, all are descendants of those trucks rolling through France. But perhaps the most important legacy is psychological. The Red Ball Express proved that American strength lay not in military genius, but in organizational capability. It showed that a democratic society's apparent chaos could produce more effective results than authoritarian efficiency. It demonstrated that diversity, racial, regional, educational, was a military multiplier, not a weakness, the final recognition. In 2024, on the 80th anniversary of D-Day, the Department of Defense announced the creation of the Red Ball Express Medal, to be awarded posthumously to all drivers who served in the operation. Most are long dead, their contributions forgotten for decades. But their legacy lives on in every Amazon delivery, every FedEx flight, every military convoy that assumes abundance rather than scarcity. The medal's citation reads, "For revolutionary logistics, operations that redefined modern warfare, for service beyond exhaustion in pursuit of victory, for proving that industrial democracy could defeat totalitarian efficiency, and for demonstrating that America's greatest weapon was not its arms, but its ability to sustain those who bore them." It's a small recognition for men who changed the world at 35 miles per hour. But as one of the few surviving veterans, 101-year-old former Private Willie Johnson of Chicago said at the announcement, "We weren't looking for medals. We were looking to win the war and go home. But it's nice to be remembered. Those trucks were heavy, those hours were long, and those roads were dark. But every mile we drove was a mile closer to victory. That's all that mattered then. That's all that matters now. Conclusion: the road that led to victory. The Red Ball Express operated for just 82 days, a brief moment in a global war that lasted 6 years. Yet in those 82 days, it demonstrated truths that would shape the next century of both military operations and civilian logistics. It proved that in the industrial age, the ability to move materials mattered more than the ability to maneuver forces. It showed that apparent waste could be strategic wisdom if you could afford it. It demonstrated that diversity and initiative could overcome doctrine and discipline. Most importantly, it proved that America's greatest military asset wasn't its weapons or its generals, but its ability to mobilize industrial abundance and human determination on a scale its enemies couldn't match or, initially, even comprehend. The German generals who laughed at American logistics in August 1944 weren't just wrong about trucks and supplies. They were wrong about the fundamental nature of modern warfare. They thought war was still about operational art, tactical brilliance, and warrior spirit. The Red Ball Express proved it was about industrial capacity, organizational capability, and the willingness to waste resources in pursuit of overwhelming advantage. In the end, 23,000 truck drivers, 3/4 of them African Americans denied basic rights in their own country, delivered more than supplies to Patton's Third Army. They delivered a new paradigm of warfare, one that would dominate military thinking for the rest of the century and beyond. They proved that in modern conflict, logistics doesn't support strategy. Logistics is strategy. And they proved it one 5-ton load at a time, one sleepless night at a time, one impossible mile at a time, until the war was won. The highways of France have been repaved many times since 1944. The ruts worn by overloaded trucks have been filled, the temporary bridges replaced by permanent structures. The supply dumps returned to farmers' fields. But the lesson of the Red Ball Express remains as clear as it was when those first trucks rolled out of Cherbourg with their headlights blazing in defiance of military orthodoxy. In modern warfare, the side that can deliver the most, the fastest, the farthest, will win. The German generals learned that lesson too late. But every military professional since has understood. When you hear the rumble of trucks that never stop, when you see the headlights that never dim, when you face an enemy who can waste more than you can save, the war is already over. The Red Ball Express didn't just supply an army, it wrote the rules for every conflict that followed. And those rules, written in tire tracks across the face of France, remain the foundation of military victory in the industrial age. Not brilliance, but abundance. Not efficiency, but effectiveness. Not conservation, but velocity. The Red Ball Express was America at war, wasteful, improvisational, mechanized, integrated despite itself, and absolutely unstoppable. In 82 days, it moved enough supplies to bury the Wehrmacht's finest divisions. But more than that, it moved the world from one era of warfare to another. And it did it all at 35 miles per hour, with the headlights on, one truck at a time.